It's really great to be with you tonight, and I really appreciate seeing so many members of our school community, whether it's parents. I also really appreciate that we have in the audience from our Board of Supervisors, Liz Palmer, who is the Vice Chair of the Board, and Diantha McKeel, who you know well from those of you that have sat with her at this podium as school board members over the years. And I also noticed that Bill Lettieri, our Assistant County Executive, is also with us tonight, and we are really excited to be here with you. I will tell you that I think about this day every year as being one of the most important days that we spend together as we restart the process of building a budget that will eventually be approved for the 15-16 school year. That we do that every year, and that it is our opportunity to restate our commitment to young people of Albemarle County Public Schools, to our educators who work so hard and touch them in so many ways, from the time that they're picked up in the morning till the time that we deliver them home or their parents deliver them home at night. That the reality is that this is a commitment to our young people, to our educators, to our parents, and to our greater community, because the work that we do, I believe, represents the most important work that occurs in the United States of America, and that is to educate our population of people who will become citizens, who will become family members as adults, and who will also become members of a workforce and participate fully in civic life that maintains who we are as a nation. I also think that, am I losing my sound here? Okay. I also think that one of the things that's really important about restating that commitment is thinking about what each funding request communicates. And when we started building this funding request, actually starting last summer, one of the things that we really kept focusing on is what's the work that we do that really is about what I've started to call a portfolio of excellence. So you will see tonight, as we focus on a portfolio of excellence that has been built in the past with investments by prior school boards, Board of Supervisors, community members, and staff, that we are now tonight looking towards the future and how we sustain that portfolio to continue to really be a high-performance school division, to support the educators who work so hard to ensure that our young people get the best that we have to offer, and that really maintains the core values that this community has for the educational services that we provide. So you will see tonight, as we move forward, a focus on what are the drivers of this funding request, what are the areas of focus within it, and also what is the story that really sits behind why we have the budget that will be built for next year, starting tonight as I pass my funding request on to the school board, why we have the numbers in it that represent those core values and our vision, mission, and goals. So that's where we're going to start. Tonight is really moving through a process of restating our commitment to the children of Albemarle County Public Schools. So I thank everyone for being here with me tonight and taking the time to really listen carefully to what will be coming forward as a part of this funding request to the school board. I believe that there is no time when we gather community together that we should not revisit what we say we believe to be the vision that is the important vision for our young people, the mission that we have for all of us that are in this room and the many people beyond this room who serve our young people, the core values that we hold dear, and what we have now as the work of a number of people extending into the thousands to help us revision our strategic plan. And what we came to was that we do have one single goal, and that is that we want all of our students, every one of them, to graduate mastering the lifelong learning skills they need as 21st century learners. The kinds of skills that will help them as citizens and as members of a future workforce. So that is really what we're all about, is remembering that is our one strategic goal. Now I want to talk a little bit about the division snapshot. And I must say, from the time that I started working in Albemarle County Public Schools in 1986 to today, that we have seen changes in our community, in our schools, in our workforce, in the technologies that we use. But one thing really struck me when I looked at the data that really represents our division snapshot. This community is the most diverse community of learners that has existed in public schools in Albemarle County probably since the beginning of public schools. So if you look at the data, one of the things that emerges for me as I think about the students in this school division, we educate children from some of the most highly educated families in the United States of America. We educate children who come from some of the wealthiest families that we could imagine. We educate children that come from middle-class families, and we educate children who live in economically disadvantaged homes. But one area that has really grown for us that I want to highlight for a moment happens to be our children that also are homeless. Because we have children that are living in shelters, that live in motel rooms, that live with friends of family, and that also live in cars. And we have 290 of those children in our schools today. The children who come to us from other nations oftentimes come to us because their families are looking for the American dream that our forefathers built, including the most famous of those that lived here in Albemarle County, who said, we want to create a nation that allows people to come to be free and to be able to have all of the opportunities that we could ever imagine. And that's one of the things that we hold dear about public education. Just recently, Matt Haas and I had a former Albemarle County student who graduated from Albemarle High School come to visit us. He's currently working as a graduate student in the Batten School of Leadership at the University of Virginia. He's a graduate of Bucknell University and a graduate of Albemarle High School. And he is really interested in how policy drives closing opportunity gaps, because when you close opportunity gaps, you close achievement gaps. So he came to talk to us about doing a thesis with us, working on policy in that area for us in Albemarle County. So we started talking to him, and one of the things that happened is that Matt keeps a chess game going on his desk in his office, so that when people come in, we'll have meetings, but we also might play a chess piece or two as we're going through the day. And so he sat down and immediately started to move pieces around on the chessboard. But we started to talk to him a little bit, and we said, so, Gerard, what about Albemarle County schools do you think was important to you as a student? And he had something to say about that.
Albemarle County provided me the opportunity to achieve to the best of my ability. From elementary school, where I learned how to play chess in 3rd grade, to being a participant in the spelling bee, to being a part of the gifted program, to sports in high school, and being able to have the ability to push myself academically. So in high school, being able to actually take classes such as AP Psychology, or being able to take classes above my standard education level. So I would say that Albemarle County provided me the opportunity to achieve, which translated into college as well, because these concepts weren't unfamiliar, and it let me know that I could do the work equal to my peers across the nation.
So one of our graduates telling us why our schools were important to him. Tonight I'm going to do something a little different for the board. Oftentimes what I do is I tell the story about how we arrived at the funding request first, and then I give you the numbers. Tonight I'm going to change that, and I'm going to give you the numbers and then put the story behind it. But I will tell you that there are 3 drivers in this request. The first is really related to sustaining market compensation using our competitive market strategy. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in depth, because we know if we do not recruit and retain the very best educators that we can find, the best bus drivers, the best custodians, the best principals, that we will not be serving our children with the most excellent education that we can provide. I'm also going to talk tonight about high quality services, and that's in our portfolio. Those services range across a variety of areas, whether it's the arts, whether it's programs like K-Tech, or even our new academies, including the newest one at Western Albemarle, programs in middle schools, elementary schools, pre-K. All of those are services, along with things like class size, that we see as part of a portfolio of excellence. And then the last piece of the driver of this funding request will be some focus on growth and what's causing the drivers behind why our growth is such an important part of this particular funding request. So I'm going to start right out with student enrollment. Since 2010-11, we've actually grown almost 600 students. One of the things that I would point out to you, and I'm going to try to get this pointer to put this up, but if you look at the number right here, one of the things that I want to do is to note that we're showing some fairly significant growth pattern in our schools. Now, I'll tell you why that's happening. We're actually having more kids that are leaving in smaller high school classes that are graduating, and much more significant growth coming into our kindergarten classes. So as that's moving up from K to 1 to 2 to 3, we're actually seeing a significant increase in the number of students in the schools. But here's something I think is pretty interesting. Notice that we thought that we would have 13,200 students walk through our doors for Albemarle County Public Schools in 14-15. We actually ended up with 13,322. So we ended up with 122 more students this year than we expected. Now that's an impact, and fortunately the board has approved as a part of prior budgets some emergency staffing that allows us to address that kind of growth. But that emergency staffing is used for just that year to help us with it. We also are projecting, based on the patterns that we're seeing with live births and other areas that go into that formula, that we will likely have, well, close to 200 new students next year. So we are looking at 311 students being in our schools next year, 100 that we didn't anticipate this year, and then close to 200 for next year. So one of the things that I would say is that we are seeing that growth occurring, and that's having some impact on our schools, obviously, and we've got to be able to stay up with, keep up with funding the staffing and the resources we need in order to absorb that growth into our schools. So this is what it looks like. That 5 years of students is the size of Jack Jewett Middle School. In fact, we redid the data, and I think that Jack Jewett just hit 599, and they were 598 at the time that we put this picture in. We also know that another driver happens to be the numbers of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, who are economically disadvantaged according to that criterion at our local community level as well as at the state and national level. And you'll notice that we've had some fairly significant increases in free and reduced lunch percentages of students, and that's continuing, although it has slowed a bit. But one of the things that's pretty important to know is that we have grown the number of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, children who are economically advantaged, by 810 students over that same period of time, as we have also shown enrollment increases. Now, one of the things that's really important about this is to remember that while not every student who's economically disadvantaged needs intervention and prevention, the reality is that we know that in general, children who live in economically disadvantaged homes oftentimes come to us. They haven't had preschool experiences. They may not have had the best of health care experiences before they get to us. They oftentimes are children who have not had the same opportunities as we see offered in families that have more of a middle class home environment in terms of funding and so forth. And so we see those opportunity gaps, whether it's the number of vocabulary words that kids bring with them into kindergarten that starts to create literacy achievement gaps, or whether it's children that just simply have not learned how to do school because they've not had a preschool experience, that we know that oftentimes that children who are economically disadvantaged are children that end up in Title I. They sometimes are our ESOL kids, sometimes special education kids, but oftentimes they're just regular education children who need some additional support in order to catch up with peers. And we're growing in that area in the county. And let's take a look at that. So 810 more free and reduced lunch students is a little less than the size of Henley Middle School, But the total number of free and reduced lunch students is equal to the total enrollment of every school in the Western feeder pattern. So we have a feeder pattern of children who are economically disadvantaged, who brings challenges with them. We also know that we are seeing an uptick that's become more significant of recent in the number of English as second language learners coming into our system. We've talked about that at the board level on several occasions. We've grown 171 ESOL students in that same time period that we've increased enrollment and increased students that are economically disadvantaged. One of the things that's important to note is that while the regular population is increased at about 2%, that what we've seen is more than 6% increase in our ESOL population. So it's growing at a faster rate. And this is what this looks like. Now, this is an important slide, and it's one I really want both the audience, the community to focus on, as well as the group in front of us at the board level. One of the reasons why you will see a gap between our revenues and expenditures is because of this slide. Over the period of time from 2008-9 until 2015-16, we have seen a loss of commitment from the state to localities in support of our schools. And that's played out in a loss of per pupil revenue from the state. So for example, in 2008-9, we received $3,653 per student. Projected for next year, we will receive $3,368 per student. Now, that doesn't sound like perhaps a real significant number until you aggregate it over several years and over the growth that we've had. And what we know is that if we were seeing the same level of per pupil revenue funding coming from the state today that came in 2008-9, we would have no funding gap in our budget because we would be receiving $3.85 million more for next year, which would exceed by a little bit our gap. So this is important because what the state has essentially done is to shift a significant burden for schools from where they were a number of years ago to where they are today. Now, when we talk about our performance portfolio, we have a competitive market that we use for compensation purposes. But when we're looking at performance, we know that we are looking at comparing our performance more likely to our school peers in Northern Virginia than anywhere else in the state. And it so happens that Northern Virginia has an effort in which they have created benchmarks for their school divisions across a number of factors. One of those are per pupil expenses. So it made sense to me that when I saw that report, that if we could plug Albemarle County and our neighbor Charlottesville, that happens to be probably our local competitor in terms of the kinds of performance portfolio that we have, whether it's arts programming or gifted programming or class sizes or teacher pay or any of the things that we really say, these are things that indicate a real commitment to excellence. When we plug that in, it's really interesting where Albemarle falls, third from the bottom, in terms of per pupil expenses. We fall below most of those Northern Virginia districts who are building out many, many different programs that we want to have for our kids too. And at the same time, we also put into this the national average per pupil and said, where do we compare to that? So you can see that as well. Now, over the last 7 years as we've had a recession, we have said to you every year the most important aspect that we want to really ensure that we protect are our classes. So the other piece that we've done is to take regular education class size, which is benchmarked by those Northern Virginia counties and the city of Charlottesville, and to say, how have we done in preserving what our parents tell us is an absolute core value for them, our teachers tell us is an absolute core value for them, and that's class size. Albemarle County, out of that group, has the best elementary class size average of any community there, regardless of the fact that we have a much lower per pupil expense than many of those Northern Virginia and certainly Charlottesville. Let's look at middle school. We're number 4. And let's look at high school, number 3. So as we have made reductions and eliminated services in Albemarle, we have tried to keep those as far away from the classroom as possible. And I think that these data support the hard work that we've engaged in as a board and as a school community to do that. Now let's look at how we fall if you average together elementary, middle, and high school. And you'll notice Arlington and Charlottesville, both of which spend significantly more than we do per pupil, are the top 2. We're number 3. And I will say that Prince William, which lags at the end, had the lowest per pupil, but also has the highest class sizes. So here's where the numbers start. There are 4 areas in this funding request that you're going to see. And by the way, you will be seeing a very differently packaged funding request this year than ever before, because what we've done in working through some changes is to build not a categorical funding request, but a program-based funding request. So when Mr. Zimmerman talks to you a little bit later, you're going to see that really play out in how this book is arranged and formatted differently. So in this funding request, you will notice that $6.5 million increase in expenses over the past year. 2.7 million of those, or 42%, happens to be in growth. 3.5 is in directed and mandated services. That's where our compensation sits. That's where our benefits, our health insurance fits. And then we have a very tiny sliver for restoration and a tiny sliver for system improvements. So what's in the directed mandated services? And I'm glad that Mr. Lettieri's with us tonight, because one of the things that I've been saying is that if you go down the list, what you'll see in our funding request, very similarly in terms of directed mandated services, has some parallel to what local government has. So when we say that we're doing a half-year 2% increase for teachers based on competitive market recommendation, when we're doing a 2.3% increase for classified staff half-year, you'll see that in the local government budget or funding request when it comes forward. Our health insurance increase, very similarly, you'll see on both sides. The transfer to comprehensive services to CSA, that's where we support our most significantly disabled students in settings that are outside the school division, as well as foster family students who are not placed in Albemarle County but who need special education services. That is in addition to the funding that we already are allocating to CSA. This is one of the fastest growing areas of cost in many school districts as well as local governments around the state of Virginia. And so that's almost a $500,000 increase. VRIP is being phased out, but we still have commitments to people that are in the VRIP pipeline, both on local government and school sides. We have 26 buildings and some other areas, such as building services and transportation, where we know that we may have some increased utility costs that we're projecting. And then similarly to local government, while we have PREP, which is our regional services for students with disabilities, including Ivy Creek, local government might show that as commitments that they have to make to jail services. One that we've got is interpretation and translation funding. That's a mandated service that we're required to provide to ESOL families by the federal government. And we're drawing money out of our instructional supplies for ESOL in order to do that. So we're putting that back in. That was in last year, so that's coming back as a directed mandate. And then we have some savings areas. Growth is the other big factor that's driving the funding request that we have this year. So growth due to enrollment are the 311 students, and that includes not just the teachers that we need to serve them, but also bus services, because we have more kids on buses, and so we're needing to add some bus service. It includes the cost of school supplies. This past year, we had to add 2 full classrooms in one of our elementary schools, and to use money from the school's instructional accounts plus money we could leverage to try to put some supplies and furniture in those rooms. Special education, ESOL, and of course with the new addition at Agna Herd of 9,000 square feet, we're going to have to add a little bit of custodial service there. So those are growth-related costs. And the next one is one that is of real concern to me for a couple of reasons. One, because professional development is one of the most important commitments that we make to growing the capacity of everybody in the system, whether it's a bus driver who's learning how to use good behavior management strategies on the bus, whether it's a teacher who's trying to learn how to use new technologies, whether it's a reading teacher that's trying to get better at teaching reading, or a 3rd grade teacher who really wants to work on math instruction. Doesn't matter what the driver is, that if we want to serve students well, we need to have professional development that supports that. So what I am proposing, not as a significant step in that direction, but as a small effort, because this year we have teachers that we're turning down right now who want to participate in professional development, and we're not able to fund their request. That if I take the Assistant Superintendent for Student Learning position and leverage that salary with a request for $58,000, that will give us enough money that we will have a little step towards restoring some funding that will support our educators to be able to participate in some things that they believe will help them be better at the work that they do. So it'll be a little over $200,000 in that account that will be there a year from now that's not there now if we're able to move that forward. And then 2 very tiny systems improvements. One, as you know, we have had in front of you, and I'm almost embarrassed to do this again, but I have to tell you, not having full-time school nurses in elementary schools is something that I feel is an improvement that we need to make a commitment to. And here's an example. We know we can't do all of that because we are certainly aware of the revenue challenges we have, but when we have schools with 500 students or more, and the numbers of students that are coming to the office and using those services, not having a full-time nurse makes it a significant challenge for office staff, perhaps a teacher who gets pulled from a classroom because maybe they have some medical expertise as a result of being an EMT or, you know, have worked in the medical field. Maybe it's the principal, who all of our principals are trained in CPR and in first aid. So we're having to pull people off the job at the end of the day or the early morning, depending on how that nurse's schedule works, who's not full-time, to do medical work on behalf of kids. And I have to tell you, one of the things that gives me heartburn about this is that if you're at Scottsville Elementary with 170 students, and you have a student who's medically fragile, perhaps it's a diabetic student, and at 2:15 when the buses are coming in and parents are calling them to change plans for kids at the end of the day, and school's winding up, and maybe you have a diabetic child who all of a sudden needs intervention, that it really concerns me that we're not able to provide that same service in that school that we would in a school with 500 plus. But we have to start somewhere. So we're going to start with our areas of greatest need and keep bringing this back. So $82,000 plus would allow us to bring our 500 plus schools up to a full-time nurse. And then the other one that I'm putting in, and this is in response to several concerns that we have. One is that we have seen a number of students who certainly we've seen increases over the years in the numbers of students that are being referred forward for disciplinary action at the central office level. And sometimes that involves the assistant superintendent, sometimes it involves me, sometimes it involves our hearing officers. But what we do is we do that in a very non-systemic manner. We also know that our schools are experiencing, particularly in our urban area where we're seeing a much higher percentage of at-risk children, that truancy is becoming a bigger issue for some families. And that I had an elementary principal share with me recently that in a period of 2 weeks, she spent about 30 hours trying to coordinate services with social services, family support, and the court system, including having to go and sit in court all day long to deal with a truancy situation in a particular family. One of the things that really concerns me is that I really am bothered by having principals getting pulled off of their job to handle those really high needs cases around truancy. When I came to Albemarle County in 1986, we had 2 full-time truancy coordinators for the entire school division. We had less than 9,000 students. Today we have almost, well, we're going to be pushing 14,000 soon, and we have none. So that's an area that I think that we really need to focus on. If we could combine those two together, we perhaps could deliver better services to our schools as well as to our families. So that's the budget in terms of a funding request. Here's the way it looks. So we have a revenue change of almost $4 million coming from federal, state, and local predictions. Our directed mandated services are approximately 3.6. Our growth expenses 2.7. So our funding gap total, before we get to those 2 slivers of ways that we think that we can improve the system, is $2.9 million. When you add those in, we have a funding gap of $3.1 million. And I want to take you back. And remember that there are many things that either we're not bringing forward to you or things that we have chosen to not do that I want to make sure that you're aware of. You have a strategic plan focus on elementary world languages. We're not recommending any expansion of the program beyond Kale. We are not bringing forward, either for local government or schools, a full year of compensation. I am removing the assistant superintendent. That will not come without cost, because we already know that when the calls come in, that Matt, myself, and Debbie are missing the 4th person that takes those calls with us. And so therefore there's a little more lag time in our being able to be responsive to folks that need to talk to us. But I'm prioritizing staff development, professional development over that position. We also are delaying or deferring adding another school resource officer back into our suite. You know that we've reduced school resource officers over the last 7 years. That's a concern for me, but I'm not able to prioritize that over some of the other things that I think are higher on the list for our community, our staff, and us. We also had the opportunity from the University of Virginia to expand adaptive services to children who have physical handicaps in our elementary school PE programs. We will absorb that rather than adding that in as a cost. So we will figure out how to cover that. And then we're also deferring any use of one-time money until we reach a point where we know we might actually be able to see our way to that. But there's one I want to particularly bring your attention to, and that is this idea of where it says health insurance hold harmless. I am very concerned, and I see some of our teacher educators in the audience, that we will be implementing a health insurance plan October 1 of next year that will increase health expenses for our employees, all of our employees. We will not implement the 2% raise until mid-year. That means that our employees will have a gap period where their net pay that they have this year will actually go down next year before they get their raise. I would like, working, and we've been talking with local government a little bit about this, for us to be able to explore, can we find a way to fill that gap so our employees don't lose any more net pay going through that period that's a gap period between insurance implementation and the raise implementation next year. So that's something for future consideration. But I feel very strongly that we need to address that. So here's our portfolio. I want to talk a little bit about this. So what are the things that we've invested in over the years? Well, visual and performing arts. Let me give you an example. In 2000, we had a group of parents from Henley Middle School who said, in Albemarle County Public Schools, if we do not have a strings program, then we do not have an arts program that really represents excellence. And the board took steps to implement a strings program. And that program has been challenged several times in terms of whether we could keep it in the budget in other years where we've had challenges to funding, but we've kept it in. Physical education. I hear all the time from peers around the state, their students don't have physical education on a daily basis, maybe not even on a weekly basis. because there is no requirement that we actually have a certain number of minutes a day or week in physical education, but we've had a commitment to that for years, and we sustain that commitment. We've sustained commitments to things like advanced placement, dual enrollment, and now virtual courses. We've sustained our commitment to class size, to competitive market compensation, to small community schools. We've built out an instructional coaching model to provide support to classroom teachers. We're now in the process of attempting to modernize schools to bring them up to par with current century expectations for what our kids are able to access and use, as well as our teachers. And we've had a real commitment to building out a performance-based assessment program for the county. So these are the kinds of things that are in our portfolio. Professional development is there, and I would put that in the red zone because we've reduced that so significantly, but we still have some commitment and believe that that's one of the things that we need to invest in excellence. We also have reduced our commitments to enrichment opportunities. So, for example, while that's still there, we aren't able to provide some of the funding that we have in past years to things such as Destination Imagination or National History Day. Field trips have been reduced at the school level, and our support from the central staff has been to reduce some of those kinds of things that we have considered to be an important part of that portfolio. So that's one I would put in the red. There may be others. And we also, over the recession era, have reduced funding for things that we think are critical. Now, while we haven't really, as you can see from the data compared to Northern Virginia, haven't touched class size so much, we did cut our department and school budgets on average by 5% last year. We've adjusted our differentiated staffing so that we have less of that going to schools. We have cut division, instructional, and support services staff. We have done a slight class size increase over the last few years. One of the ones that really has impacted us is a cut in teacher stipends. They've been cut by 35%. Our teachers are getting less for doing the same job today than we were giving teachers funding probably 15 years ago. So these are things that we've reduced or eliminated to try to hold on to that investment portfolio. So we've tried to really make sure that we're sustaining our funding for the things that we believe make the most difference for kids in the classroom, but it has not come without cost. And finally, this is what the gap looks like. $3.1 million on the teeter-totter. Our expenses are almost $167 million. Our revenues are about $164 million. And so we have that $3.1 million gap. And remember, the state is the big contributor to that gap. So Albemarle County Public Schools, the story behind the portfolio, behind the numbers, in terms of the decisions we've made, relates to three areas that I see as the themes that we also want to maintain. We know that high performance comes when we sustain investments in our excellent work that we've done. So let me give you a little story about our strings program. When we added that program in 2003, we had 7 string students in the Albemarle High School strings program. This year, there are 85. We have a full orchestra. Full orchestra. And this is another thing that's pretty interesting about it, that we had more people listening to the last concert by the strings program at Albemarle High School, the last concert, than watched virtually, and this is all virtual data, more people virtually listening than watched that graduation of Albemarle High School. That's how much people love our strings program in this community. And that's because of an investment in instruments, in staff, in children, in professional development that has led us to build that program. And it's not just been built in the northern feeder pattern, it's been built in the southern feeder pattern, and it's been built in the western feeder pattern. Now, here's some other comparisons. Looking at some of our benchmarking data. You have seen this. Some of the audience has seen it. We have a dropout rate that puts us in rarefied air. A 2.3% dropout rate in 2014 represents 23 students. Now, I will tell you, and you're going to see some data in a minute, why those 23 students count for us in our community, not just the year that they drop out, but forevermore. And I will tell you a story that I think is important about our commitment to kids that drop out. We had a student approach us recently who's 20 years old. He left lacking about 4 credits of graduating. Came to Debbie Collins. Debbie said, let me see if I can help. She looked at our APEX program, which is our virtual learning program that lets kids go through the coursework that they need at the pace that they can. She talked to one of our high school principals to find out if he would work with this student, and that student is now coming back into our school system, taking those courses virtually. We'll be getting some support from the school so that we can put a diploma in his hand because it means something to him at age 20 that maybe it didn't mean to him at age 17. So every dropout counts. Every student counts. So it doesn't matter whether it's graduation rate, dropout rate, the number of our kids earning the gold standard advanced studies diploma, our average SAT scores. And I will tell you that when you compare our SAT scores to the state, they look good. When you compare them nationally, just check this out. Our verbal at 563, at the national level it's 497. Our math at 566, at the national level it's 513. And our writing at 539, at the national level it's 487. So we're above the nation and the state on every indicator that we can find. Now, here's another piece of pretty interesting data. We had, in this past year, approximately 2,450 AP tests taken in which students earned a 3 or above. Now, a 3 or above will get you, in many colleges in Virginia, a credit for a course. Here's the thing that's fascinating. The tuition in Virginia right now, colleges, on average is $1,300 for a course. When we send a student to JMU with 15 credits from AP courses or dual enrollment, and they are able to graduate early if they so choose, think about the economic impact in a family and what a gift that is that we're giving kids to be able to take those kinds of college credits with them. So there's a return on our investment that doesn't just pay off for us, but it pays off for our family. And I'm going to tell you in a minute how it pays off for our community. The other piece of this is that we've invested in the AVID program. And that's been a really important part of work that we've built out by investing in the training and the focus that we've had in our schools on building the courses that support kids that will be first-generation college students, because nobody in their family has been a person who has finished college or gone to college. So let's take a look at that. Our graduates in 2014 were accepted at 284 different colleges and universities. They went to 21 of the top 25 private nationals and 20 of the top 25 public nationals. Now, let me tell you about AVID. When we implemented that program in 2006, we first had 39 students in the program at 3 schools. Today, we have 402 children that are moving through that program. And that's a pretty interesting statistic, because these are kids that are leaving us college ready, who in many cases have told us, I wouldn't have even considered college if I hadn't had a teacher come to me and say, have you thought about applying to go into the AVID program? And we've invested in training, and we invest in the program. We've also invested in changing courses that will allow us to be able to offer some skill sets for kids to develop in partnership. And this is one you may remember when Adrian Phelps came from Battelle and presented us with a $20,000 check to support our middle school engineering programs. So we had 3 that we'd been able to implement at Jewett, at Sutherland, and at Burley. At Jewett, Sutherland, and Walton. But we were not able to. We did not have the funding 2 years ago to implement those at Henley and at Burley. So when Adrian Phelps showed up from Battelle and said, here, as a partner, we want to provide you with this funding, we were able to open the first engineering program in CTE at Burley. The classes are enrolled, the kids are excited, and this is what the teacher had to say. Our new Burley Tech classes allow students the freedom to do hands-on creating as they are learning science, physics, and engineering principles. Self-confidence builds throughout the semester as students practice and learn one skill after another, one tool after another. Students are teachers and generous in sharing their knowledge with others. It's rewarding to see eager learners who can't stop making. They ask to stay in class at lunchtime too. Well, that's certainly something right there, because our kids tell us that their 2 favorite times of day are going to lunch and recess. And so if you've got kids that want to stay in class at lunch, that tells you that something's really working. What's most important about this, though, is that some people say, well, why do you want to really focus on this engineering anyway? Because a lot of these kids aren't going to become engineers. But when I read this, what I see is that while engineering activities get these kids excited, they are learning workforce readiness skills. They are learning life skills that don't have anything to do with engineering. They're building self-confidence. They're learning how to work in teams with other students. They're learning how to share what they know as well as to learn from others. And those are things that are really important for a lifetime. So these classes are working because they're grabbing kids' interest, they're grabbing their excitement, and they're causing them to really work on some things that are important for working in this century. And of course, for us, our most vital asset are our personnel. And we know that our kids' success, our capability to maintain a portfolio of excellence, to be able to see ourselves as offering comparable services and programs and getting the high performance of our peers in Northern Virginia or even outside of the state, really depends on our employees. And we do not want to see a decline towards average. Now I'm going to tell you why this is so important to me. In 2003, I was assistant superintendent, and I remember our HR staff coming to the school board at that time and saying, we've got a problem. And the problem looks like this. We're not getting the quality or number of applications for teaching positions that we're used to. And we've been doing some research, and we believe it's because we're not keeping up with the competitive market. And this board and the Board of Supervisors got together and said, we're going to change our market strategy from 50th percentile of the market for teachers to the bottom of the top quartile. And that happened, and that year we put 9% raises in for teachers to bring them up to market. And the next year, that pool of applicants turned around. That's why that's important, because if we want to attract the best, if we want to keep the best, then we're going to have to put the funding behind the compensation that will allow our staff to see themselves as valued right here in Albemarle County. So what do you get when you pay for the best? This is what we know from the research. This is what we know from our own experiences. Whether it's a bus driver, and nobody wants a C-level bus driver, or whether it's a custodian who makes sure that those bathrooms in the schools are clean and cleaned well. Nobody wants a custodian who's a 3 cleaning when what you really need is a 5. And when we hire our new teachers, we want to invest in them so that they are really heading towards exemplary, even though they may have some things to learn along the way. So what you get when you invest in your employees are people who do these things and see themselves as lifelong learners. They value professional development, and they value the things that they do because they know they make a difference with children. So let's drill down to what teachers do. Here's what we know from a study that's been recently released by Harvard and Columbia University. They actually studied a school district for 20 years, an urban school district for 20 years, and 2.1 million students that passed through during that period of time. And here's what they found. Excellent teachers result in these things for kids. They result in kids that are more likely to pursue education after high school. As a result of that, those kids will earn higher salaries. They will have more high-quality life experiences, and they will actually end up saving more for retirement. And that's not just a gift to those kids, but it's also a gift to their communities and to the nation. And we know from our AVID research that a student who graduates from high school will earn significantly more than a student who drops out. But check out what happens when we take those high school graduates and send them off to college and they get that bachelor's degree. We make a difference of $1.2 million in their lifetime earnings on average. And then here's one that I think is very critical, having just come through the recession. The more educated that a person becomes, the less likely that they will be unemployed. And during the recession, this data have played out locally, at the state level, and the national level. That if you don't earn a high school diploma, look where you were going to be in terms of unemployment rate. And think about every student we graduate. And it worries me that those 23 kids that dropped out of our schools could likely, in 10 years, if they don't get that diploma, find themselves in another recession being one of the unemployed. So why invest in our teachers right now? This is where the rubber meets the road. In red are our teachers who are approaching or at retirement age, and there's a significant number that are bubbling through, those folks that look like me that we call the baby boomers. And here's what we know. There are fewer people choosing to become teachers today in numbers than ever in the last 5 to 10 years. People are not choosing when they graduate from high school to become education majors. And the decline from our graduate or from our education schools, they're reporting from California to Pennsylvania drops of 25 to 40+% in people choosing to go into education. Why? You think about, you go through the University of Virginia as an education major, or let's say an engineering major, and you know you're going to pay the same tuition, but when you graduate, you're going to have a very different career pathway in terms of your earnings potential. We know our baby boomers are approaching retirement. They'll be moving out in droves as there's an increase in the numbers of kids in school. We know that our teacher salaries aren't competitive with other professions, but we also know this. When our folks go to recruit teachers, we aren't the only folks recruiting from our education schools. We have banking folks showing up to try to hire teachers. We have people from other professions trying to hire graduating teachers. It's not just us. And we know that we're going to be competing with people like Loudon, who's going to be hiring 500 to 1,000 new teachers in another year. Think about that. Now, this request puts a real focus on how do we make sure we focus on priorities that our stakeholders have. So let's take that data and play it forward. We found when we did a survey, when we went out to focus groups, whether we talk to community members who don't even have children in our schools, when we talk to students, parents, employees, every which way we cut it, every single group said the most important area of focus to be sure you do not lose is employee compensation. The next two were class size and growth, and then the third was the fourth was professional training. And 47% of all those respondents said employee compensation has got to be the top priority. But we do have a funding gap. And we do have a state that has lost its commitment to public education as they have gone through the recession. And we would not have that funding gap if the state was simply keeping themselves as holding serve in terms of their per pupil revenues to us. Here's something else that really is a concern. We last year did a joint survey with the Albemarle Education Association, and here are two things that we found that we think are critical. One is that our teachers do not believe that they have the classroom resources that they need to be able to teach well. And we know that we are seeing teachers paying out of pocket, principals paying out of pocket. I see central office staff making donations to help out schools. I see community members, PTOs, everybody trying to backfill what we need for our classrooms to have the resources they need. I even had a mom say to me recently, boy, I thought when my daughter went to work for you, I wouldn't be paying anything out of pocket, but I'm finding I'm having to buy things for her classroom. We also know that our employees said that their expectations for compensation were well below what they expected. And in fact, 62.3% of our instructional employees said they feel it is absolutely necessary economically to supplement their salaries. So the most important profession in America, we have educators out there supplementing their salaries so they can work for us. That doesn't feel so good to me as a superintendent. I had a parent say to me that one night they ordered pizza. The person that showed up to deliver the pizza to their door was one of their school's teachers. Probably everybody in this room has gone into a restaurant in Albemarle County and had a teacher wait on them. And those people are doing that so they can work for us and, most importantly, serve our children well. So let's take a look at how we compare to our Northern Virginia performance benchmark group. On the left, you see the minimum starting salary for teachers from Arlington down to Albemarle. And Albemarle, Charlottesville's not on this because I couldn't get them in the slideshow. Charlottesville and Albemarle are just a few $100s apart on the bottom of the scale. We're both in the 44,000 range. So you can see what that looks like. Jump over to the right. That's the top of the scale for our peer group. Charlottesville City is somewhere around 67 plus. We're at 71 on the top. Now, imagine you're a teacher who's a first-year teacher graduating from the University of Virginia. You might say, you know, I could live in Culpeper or Madison and maybe have a fairly low rent there, and I can either hop on 29 and head north and hop off at Loudon, who needs me, or I can go south to Albemarle that needs me, and maybe I've student taught here and I love this community, but I can see the mountains from Loudon, and it's not that much of a drive, and look what my potential will be. Or imagine you're one of our teachers who's been working for 15 years in the system, and you're thinking, I don't have a lot of room to still grow in terms of compensation. What if I'm living in Orange County and I can make the drive down to Route 3 and around and up and hit one of these Northern Virginia communities, and I can come in at 15 years and look where I can go. I fear we'll be back to 2003 if we don't really look at the competitive side of our work. This is not our competitive market, it is our performance market. And I did have a parent last night at Parent Council say, I'm not interested in hearing about some small rural counties. I want my child to get what Fairfax gives them. Now, here's what happens when it comes to our take-home pay. This is true for local government and schools. We took a $50,000 employee and said, what's happened since 2009? Looks like that their gross salary has gone up, and it has, because of VRS primarily. Look at their net salary. It's actually less than it was in 2009. And if you adjust it for inflation, it even shows more of a drop in terms of the buying power that a family would have. Now think about this. If you were a first-year teacher 5 years ago, you're making less today after 5 years of commitment to Albemarle County in terms of net than you were 5 years ago. So here's what Michael Ronnie, new principal at Meriwether Lewis, has worked in one of our most at-risk schools, Cale Elementary. He says, if we cannot pay teachers in a way where they can live in the very communities that they serve, something is not only terribly wrong, but is also potentially detrimental. I fear that by not paying teachers better, we will be extending our debt to a point that far outweighs the worth of our teachers. Just as millions lost their homes, we will lose our teachers. And if, for some reason, our teachers don't physically leave us, we will most certainly begin to lose them in terms of morale. Compensation is a direct reflection of what we value. Now, we know across the United States of America, the teaching profession feels beleaguered by increasing mandates, increasing expectations, and compensation that has been flat or lost, and many educators have lost their jobs in other places. We've really worked hard to not have that happen here, but I think that Mike is trying to say to us, we really need to pay attention to this. So, in closing, we've got 3 areas that we think are critical. We want to sustain our performance as a school division. We know that our personnel are our most vital asset, and that our continued success, our future success of our portfolio, is dependent upon the employees that we're able to hire, retain, and develop over time. And that this funding request is a reflection of the priorities from our stakeholders. So I'm going to leave you with Gerard. This is 4th grade Gerard. And this is what Gerard ended his statement to us the other day when he was waxing poetic to Matt and I about the wonderful education that he had received in Albemarle County Public Schools. He said, Albemarle County to me represents the opportunity to achieve, and that's something that we should stick to. I don't think there's anybody in the room that would disagree with Gerard about that statement. The most important thing for me about where we are right now is how do we sustain the investments that we've made in the critical programs and services and people that serve our young people? How do we continue to make sure that we provide a future of excellence for this community? Because the kids that we're serving today will be the parents of tomorrow, our workforce of tomorrow, and our citizens of tomorrow. as adults, and we want to make sure that all of our students feel about our schools the way that Gerard does. So, we're going to be turning it over to Jackson Zimmerman right now, and I have to say that Jackson has been working nonstop since last summer to refocus the way that we present budget, and there are two things that we felt were most important that occur as we repackage our format. One is that we have a format that is as transparent as possible as to where our money sits, and number two, that it's accessible. So we've been working with local government. Bill has been working very closely with Lori Allshouse, with Dean Tisdat, with Jackson Zimmerman, with board members on both sides to really go after some changes in the way that we really share information with you. And we so appreciate the work that we've been able to do. One thing that's going to be different this year is that we will have a budget landing page that will have local government and school division funding request information being built there, so that anybody that wants to see what does the funding requests that are moving forward look like will be able to go to one site for both the school division and local government. So again, Mr. Lettieri, I say thank you to you and your staff and the folks on the fourth floor for working with our staff to make the work that we've done possible to shift this. So I am at this point saying my funding request has become yours, and that we will be working hard over the next month or two to try to be able to get that into a place so that as the Board of Supervisors does their work with staff, that by the end of April that we'll be ready to approve a budget for 15-16. And I've got my fingers crossed. I will tell you that I had a fortune cookie today that somebody gave me, and I opened it up and it said something like this: today is a golden opportunity for investment. And I thought, well, this could be our lucky day. Maybe we'll figure out how to close that gap, sustain our investments, and make sure that we continue for Albemarle County, both our local government's needs and our school division's needs, a really bright future. So thank you so much. And I think that Mr. Zimmerman, you're ready to roll. And thank you in the audience that have been here and have been so patient.